I'm very happy about your attendance and participation today, and as well in the DCF before. We have a very distinguished set of panelists and speakers today. And without any further ado, I would like to give it to Mr. Naveed Hanif to deliver some opening remarks. Mr. Naveed Hanif is the Director of the Financing for Sustainable Development Office and in charge of the work of many different work streams and strands, but also, of course, about the work on infrastructure asset management. Naveed, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Daniel, and greetings to everyone from New York. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone to today's side event that we are holding in the margins of the Development Cooperation Forum's high-level meeting. The DCF discussions thus far have already brought to the fore actionable proposals and innovative development cooperation models that reduce risk, enable recovery, and build resilience in the COVID-19 period and beyond. We are going to focus on one key question today, and that is how development cooperation on effective infrastructure asset management can spur progress towards healthier, more resilient, more sustainable, and thriving communities. And as all of you know, this is also the essence of the 2030 agenda, that we want to have a world where no one is left behind. And that's what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. And we are very fortunate to have with us a diverse and distinguished panel of experts to address this question. And of course, show us the way forward. But before we invite them, I want to offer three key messages to set the stage for the discussion from our DCF work and our capacity development work on asset management, which Daniel has led so ably. First message is rather a question: how is sound infrastructure asset management is strongly linked to the efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda? In our view, one direct pathway is that governments need to invest not only in infrastructure, but in the long-term provision of essential public services that depend on such infrastructure. People rely every day on roads for commuting to work, buildings for attending schools, or receiving healthcare, water and sanitation facilities for proper hygiene, and many other infrastructure assets that are essential for providing such services. And when governments do not account for the financial, human, and material resources needed to manage these assets over time, they risk wasting the initial investments and leaving societies vulnerable to the impacts of failing infrastructure, leading to failure to meet their basic needs. And these impacts are already worsening with climate change, urbanization, and other disruptive trends. It is high time that governments pursued actionable policies there is some difference. Actionable policies, plans, and programs that capitalize on the real links between asset management and the SDGs. The second message. Daniel, can you hear me?
I can hear very well. Can I ask everyone else, please, to mute themselves? Thank you.
Yeah, there is some noise, and also somebody's projecting their own video. So
yeah, please, everyone, mute yourself. Thank you.
Second, the current pandemic has exposed cities and municipalities worldwide to high risks posed by inadequate healthcare facilities and other critical infrastructure. Our analysis indicates that with the right support from national and international stakeholders, local governments can use sound asset management as a first line of defense in emergency and other crisis situations. We recommend that governments and their development partners must join hands to leverage critical infrastructure assets for social and economic recovery that will improve livelihoods, food security, gender equity, and advance progress towards all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The third message is national and local governments need quality development cooperation now more than ever to strengthen the resilience, accessibility, and sustainability of their infrastructure investments. Ladies and gentlemen, infrastructure asset management is an underutilized arena for effective development cooperation. Effective asset management can support implementation of multi-stakeholder commitments to large public infrastructure investments that demand consideration of the long-term risks and opportunities. Development cooperation, in turn, can sustain effective asset management by opening up and leveraging new channels for capacity building, knowledge exchange, and innovative financing solutions. The recent Financing for Development Forum outcome calls on all relevant stakeholders to collectively address the capacity and funding gaps that inhibit infrastructure investments from being risk-informed and climate resilient. This involves working through existing initiatives within the UN development system, the World Bank, and other multilateral institutions. Colleagues, I just want to highlight that UNDESA and UNCDF in February this year released Managing Infrastructure Assets for Sustainable Development, a handbook for local and national governments, of course with strong contributions from UNOPS. Each member of today's panel played a pivotal role in bringing this handbook to life and making its guidance and tools available to policymakers and practitioners worldwide. Huge thanks to all of you. The side event today is built around many ideas presented in the handbook. Well before the COVID-19 outbreak, the DCF's emphasis on strengthening local and regional capacities through risk-informed and climate-smart development cooperation helped inspire the In Focus chapters of the handbook. And I draw your attention to this handbook. Please read it and use it. Between February and April, we have delivered a series of virtual trainings on infrastructure asset management for government officials, as well as their partners in academia, civil society, and the private sector. The training engaged roughly 2,400 participants from over 1,000 local governments in Africa, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean. But our work has just begun. And I'm glad that you're joining us at the very beginning. Let me assure you that you are in for a rich and lively discussion and lots of work ahead of you. I hope the discussion today will inspire reflection, dialogue, as well as drive concrete action on development cooperation for effective infrastructure asset management. Our common goal is to build a future that is resilient and inclusive. I cannot end without thanking my colleagues, Ms. Caroline Lombardo and Mr. Daniel Platt, and the whole team for their outstanding work. And I want to thank you again for your contributions. Thank you for your participation today. We're looking forward to a productive conversation. Daniel, back to you.
Thank you so much, Naveed, for your very thought-provoking opening remarks, highlighting the importance of infrastructure asset management for the SDGs, the importance of local governments in implementing infrastructure asset management, and then the potential for a mutually reinforcing link between development cooperation and infrastructure asset management, which is very much the focus of today's panel. I'd like to give it over to David Jackson, who heads the local development finance practice at UNCDF and has been a fantastic partner on the ground. UNCDF and now UNOPS as well are really key for this effort to bear fruits on the ground. They have the contacts in the field, they do the work in the field, and it's been an incredible partnership. So over to you, David.
Thank you so much indeed, Danielle, and thank you, Naveed, as well for that excellent introduction. And I'd like just to add a slightly different dimension, but build very much on what was said so far. And that is really connecting the Agenda 2030 with the issue of infrastructure finance and local government finance. And I think what we see is that the current global financial framework, the global financial system, is not fit for purpose when it comes to subnational finance, infrastructure finance, and therefore is not fit for purpose yet, unfortunately, when it comes to meeting the SDGs. The infrastructure for 2030 is being planned and built now, right now. And there's a lot of talk about financing for development, bringing the private sector in the SME space, the impact investment space. But that is a different type of finance, short tenure, 5 years being the exit, with infrastructure finance, which is, of course, much longer tenure and a very different set of arrangements. And what we see right now, I'm going to highlight three big issues that need to be addressed, and then close by linking that very directly with asset management as perhaps the third issue. So, I mean, what we see right now is that a lot of infrastructure finance is actually in developing countries is structured around sovereign debt, sovereign loans. And most countries are maxed out on that. And clearly that is not going to be sufficient volume of finance to meet the infrastructure requirements, particularly when one takes into account, as the handbook has pointed out, that asset management is a large part of the overall cost of infrastructure. And it's not just the construction, but also particularly when one considers the volume required. So most countries in the world have already reached what it seems to be a stable level of between 70 to 80% urbanization. In fact, many reach 80 and then go back down again to 75, 70% as people start to live in rural areas, but commuting for work to the urban centers. There are some parts of the world that have not yet reached that stable state. And they coincide with some of the poorer parts of the world and the most rapidly developing parts of the world. Now, what you see in countries that have completed that transition relatively recently in history, such as parts of China, South Korea is a really good example where there is a lot of data available, is that at the key moment when they are moving from 30% to 80% urbanization, there is a very high level of investment. In fact, up to 45% of GDP is invested in infrastructure at that moment of their transition. But what we are seeing in a lot of the developing countries where we are working right now, that investment is not happening, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Burkina Faso, whether it's Bangladesh. The urbanization is becoming low investment urbanization, which means it's low productivity urbanization, low quality of and certainly not as environmentally sustainable. And that is locking in problems for the future, which is locking in what 2030 will look like. So as it currently stands, 2030 is not going to look very well. And this is a critical issue. And we have identified, together with partners United Cities and Local Governments, UNDP, FMDV, UN Habitat, and many others, we have coalesced around the Malaga Coalition, which is a coalition for a global financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments. And we have recently published the 3 main policy areas of this coalition. So one of them, of course, is the necessity to rebuild local fiscal space. And it would be build local fiscal space, but now it's rebuild, because the COVID crisis has really hit local fiscal space very hard. And this is coincided with the move to online forms of commerce, which are reducing the revenue from certain types of bricks and mortar fixed assets that used to come to local governments. So a strong public sector is essential for private sector development, and diminished local fiscal space reduces the capacity of that strong public sector, and broadly speaking, reduces the ability for cities and to manage their capital investment programs adequately and in the public interest. Rebuild local fiscal space is one. Number two, leverage financing mechanisms to increase capital flows for transformative financeable investments at the local level. And this really talks about opening up the subnational capital markets and opening up subnational finance to global capital markets. There is what we call the Benin Paradox, whereas the government of Benin has access to capital markets using its sovereign guarantee, monopoly of taxation, so it has relatively concessional access to capital markets and to funds from IDA, for example, whereas the city of Cotonou does not have access to the Green Climate Fund, does not have direct access to IDA, does not have access to capital markets. Yet the city of Cotonou, the capital of Benin, accounts for 70% of Benin's GDP and has to tidy up the mess, has to fix all the problems associated with the rapid urbanization. And of course, for political reasons, as we all know, there are not, often there's political economy issues between big cities and the sovereign government. So there are structural issues there that need to be unblocked in order for capital to be able to be deployed at the subnational level. One key way of unblocking this, of course, is developing domestic capital markets, domestic bond markets, really finding ways to recycle domestic pension funds and other domestic assets through infrastructure investment using domestic markets. And that's an area that the coalition is working strongly on. Finally, however, it's important to build effective partnerships for financing and managing local infrastructure assets. And this is the third area of the policy coalition, and it is the area that is addressed in the handbook. And it is a critical area, and it's probably of the three the most overlooked, if you like. And that is where this partnership with UNDESA is path-breaking, because it has actually highlighted an area which has long since needed highlighting. And so the 5 priority areas for action in this partnerships for managing local infrastructure assets, many of which are covered by the handbook, and the fact that we've already reached the volume of local governments described is a great achievement. But as mentioned by Navid, it's just the start. We now need to reach the rest, and it's great that you're in at the beginning. And I'm just going to list the 5 areas for action in the local infrastructure asset management, and then I will finish. So, of course, capacity building is 1. Explore how local infrastructure assets can contribute more to fiscal space is 2. Design and implement equity and ownership models for local infrastructure assets so that the accountability is there on the ownership and the equity is there. It's not subsidizing private ownership and losing the public accountability. There needs to be perhaps intermediary institutions that can do some of this management, pooling different assets from different local governments, and of course advocate for local financial and asset management as a national development priority. And that's where I think the introductory comments by Navid has really moved us forward. This is a national development priority. Asset management is a national development priority, particularly subnational asset management. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much to Daniel and the team. It has been a wonderful collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for these very well-structured remarks and making a strong case for the link between creating fiscal space, improving financial viability, creating creditworthiness, and mobilizing more capital on one hand, and then better infrastructure asset management. The better we manage our infrastructure, the more likely we are to attract new funds. That was a very powerful statement. Thank you, David. I would like to give the floor now to Caroline Lombardo. Caroline is the chief of the International Tax and Development Cooperation branch in the Financing for Sustainable Development office. She has a huge portfolio, but among many other things, she is also one of the chief editors of the Handbook on Infrastructure Asset Management. Caroline will be the moderator for today. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Naveed and David, and thank you, panelists, participants, all of you for being here today. So we move to our expert panel presentations. All of the panelists have contributed in major ways to the handbook, which is the basis for our discussion, as you've just heard. So we'll proceed. They have a tour de table. So I will take you one at a time, introduce you to each panelist, and they'll give a 5 minutes presentation perspective on different aspects of the issues just laid out. So let me move first to Ajit Kumar Palekar. He's a reader in asset management at the Cambridge University Engineering Department. He's based at the Institute for Manufacturing, where he's the head of the Asset Management Research Group. Ajit leads the research activities on engineering, asset management, and maintenance. His particular focus is examining how asset information can be used to improve asset performance through effective decision-making. He actively engages with industry through research and consulting projects. Ajit, 2 questions for you. How can data and information be most effectively used and leveraged for infrastructure asset management? And then, how can governments, especially in lower income countries, capitalize on advancements in digital technologies for more effective asset management? Over to you, Ajit. You have about 5 minutes. Thank you. Yep,
thank you. Just to highlight, I think the host has disabled my video, so you can't see me, but that's not my fault. Sorry. Just focusing on the first question, how can data and information be most effectively used and leveraged for infrastructure asset management? Just a brief, if I summarize asset management in one sentence, I would say it's all the processes and decisions that an organization has to take in order to maximize the value that they get from the assets, right? Now, if you think about it, one of the major factors that prevent effective asset management is that managers often don't know what assets they have, what condition they are in, how fast they are deteriorating, and what impact any asset failures might have in the ability to provide service. And this is true not just in developing countries, it's true in many developed countries as well. We don't like it, but that's the truth. Now, so in order to make sure asset management really delivers value, we need to make sure that the decisions that are taken as part of asset management are taken in an informed manner. So having good data and information is really critical. Now, an important thing to make sure the data is most effectively used is to understand who the different stakeholders of the assets are, what these stakeholders actually do on a day-to-day basis, what data they need to support their decisions and their activities. Now, in our handbook, we have presented a systematic approach for developing an asset information management system, and having such a systematic approach is really critical to get maximum value from asset data. The third point I want to make is that the quality of data we collect is really important. So similar to product quality, the asset data quality is also really critical. Now, when I say quality in terms of the accuracy of data, the timeliness, the completeness, and so on. Now, the point here is not to get everything perfect. So it's not about being 100% accurate. It's really critical to understand how good is good enough quality and focus on getting the important data correct and accessible to users. Now, the final point I want to make is that we need to understand that the critical success factor in asset management is not necessarily the systems and technologies we have. It's the people that we have and the people who are responsible for managing assets. So we need to motivate people to ensure that they really understand the importance of data and they are equipped with the right skills to exploit the available data. So that's my answer to your first question. And the second question was about what advice I would provide to a donor government to support local governments in developing countries. Now, if we think about setting up an asset information system, it's really not a one-off project. We talk about this in our handbook as well. It's a new way of thinking and working. So donor governments, it might be probably easier for you to think, okay, I'm going to spend some money, I'm going to give you some money, and we will do it for you. We will collect all the data about your assets and we'll set up a system for you. But then what happens after you leave? Like their asset data will also degrade and fail in due course. So this is aligned to what David said in his final remarks. What I would really recommend donor governments to do is to invest in capacity building, because it's really important that personnel on the ground are equipped with the right skills and knowledge, as I said earlier, so that we can ensure long-term sustained good practice in data management. And the last point is that developing countries also need help and guidance in setting up standard good practice data management processes and systems. So help in setting up these standards and so on is something donor governments can look at supporting by funding such activities. That's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Ajit. That tracks exactly with the findings of our 2020 Development Cooperation Forum survey, where the participating developing country governments identify which areas they most need capacity support to be able to use their own country systems and processes and platforms for development cooperation most effectively. And they find that unless it has that long-term capacity building perspective from the outset, the interventions don't lead to, a sustainable capacity that's growing at the country level in a way that's usable over time. Did you want to comment on the digital aspect, the use of digital technology?
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that. So in terms of these digital technologies and advances in digital technologies, there are lots of buzzwords that we hear these days. And I want to say, so my own research, I actually focus on digital technologies and how we can exploit that for asset management. And these technologies, they really have the potential to transform the way we manage our infrastructure assets. Here in the UK, we talk about smart infrastructure where bridges, tunnels, roads, and so on are embedded with sensors telling us in real time what their condition is. We talk about digital twins of infrastructure where different types of infrastructure data are integrated and models are being created using machine learning and so on to improve our understanding of how our infrastructure works and behaves. Now, when I think about these in a low-income country context, all of these sound very complicated and expensive, right? So what we, in my opinion, what we really need to look at is technology that really works at a more fundamental level, technology that helps personnel on the ground to do their jobs more effectively, technology that is low cost and offers very good value for money. Now, there are some examples of such technologies are low-cost mobile phones that have got GPS and camera capabilities that can be used in an effective manner to capture data about your assets. Drones, some of the drones that are available in the market are really inexpensive and they can cover large spaces in short duration of time. People are also developing low-cost systems where, for example, you can use a simple camera that is fitted on a vehicle or even a bike to capture the road condition as you drive on and records potholes and cracks along with their location in an automated fashion. And these are not expensive technologies. They sound fancy and expensive, but they are not. But what I would also say is that for developing countries, the aim is to start small. Start by building an asset register, getting the basic data sorted, build the capability of local teams, and then look at adopting more advanced technologies as the maturity of the team develops. There's a lot of capabilities out there in terms of these digital technologies, but we need to take that in a stepwise manner.
Excellent. Thank you, Ajit. So let's move now to our next panelist. This is Diana Lopez Caramezana. She's our partnership specialist on cities and urbanization at UNDP, with more than 20 years experience in the UN system, supporting local governments, governance, and public management innovation. Diana has previously worked as the head of local governments and decentralization unit of UN Habitat, and she spent 8 years working on local development issues with the ILO, International Labour Organization. 2 questions for you this morning, Diana. First, how can local government associations and networks support sound asset management on the ground? And second, how can we uplift the priorities and the voices of local governments in discussions around international development cooperation? Over to you, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. I could speak about this issue for hours, but I have 5 minutes. So I wanted to focus a little bit on also what donors can do for local governments on that aspect. So I was preparing for this, and just on the 4th of May, on Tuesday, the New York Times had this big picture in the front cover about Wall Street wants to invest in infrastructure, which is good. So it's the private sector coming to the public one. And then there was this sentence about that even in the States, they have fallen behind 21st century standards. So I was wondering, what are those 21st century standards, and how donors and the partners need to start considering these standards when we come into asset management, and specifically in municipal and local infrastructure. So we cannot do things as they were in the past. So this is an infrastructure of the past. This is the aqueduct of Segovia in Spain. It has 2,000 years and it still works. It carries water from one part to the next. So this is an old photo also. I chose it specifically when they were, you see the car is an old car. They still have cows bringing materials around the city, etc., etc. So this is a little bit what we are thinking about infrastructure still. Our mindset is still 2,000 years ago. And of course, we need to do things differently. And I'm going to focus on the city. The city gives an enormous opportunity, an incredible opportunity to integrate things. As Navid was saying before, the SDGs happen in the city in a more integrated manner. Any mayor knows that when you do an intervention on transport, you have an effort on the people living in the city and the mothers taking their children to school, in the waste that the mothers produce when they process the food for the children in the school. Everything comes together in the city. So we have to start thinking about infrastructure in a smarter way, but with the people in front, because the people are the users of the city. And we have to develop better services for these people. So that is very easily said and very difficultly done. And I'm very happy that the handbook of UNDESA and UNCDF is really helping to tackle all this governance issue that comes when we think an infrastructure in the city, which is never an infrastructure, never an asset. It's never only, I love the handbook description of these assets, which are buildings. You can see this very good, very well here. The equipment that comes with the buildings, the natural resources that we need nature in cities. We need water, we need oxygen. And then, of course, the pure infrastructures. So 2 things we have to start thinking about it. One is how to do smarter, and the second is how to do it greener. This is no longer an option, and local governments know very well about climate action, and they know that it's also a way to create jobs, and it's also a way to do things much better. So of course, we have to start showcasing investment versus maintenance. And this any mayor will understand very well. This is a project in Xalapa, Mexico. So this is an old infrastructure, not taking into consideration nature-based solutions. That the project cost was 40 million, but then the maintenance is 8.8 million a year, versus a new way, smarter and greener way of delivering infrastructure, which the project cost, of course, is higher, it's 55, because it requires innovation, it requires moving things to do things differently, as we used to, but then the cost of maintenance per year is only 500,000. So we have to make a case for smarter and greener infrastructures in cities, and we need to take into consideration maintenance cost. And I love this material of UNDESA because it's finally talking about maintenance and not only investment in infrastructure. Then I'm going to focus on your question about local government associations. Of course, they are key in moving these things around because the local government associations have national associations. They are implemented in every country. And this material, the UNDESA handbook, we have worked very closely with local government associations. We have our colleague from FMDB. Today, we have been working also with UCLG and others to bring a really useful approach. So this material is really useful for local governments. Because we need to put together the two things that comes together. One is producing tools as this handbook that help local governments to manage infrastructures better. And I'm very happy to have contributed to the governance part of how they integrate between the local and the central and the regional and this very interesting dynamics that come along in every country, in Africa, in Asia. It's the governance question of a breach is never a breach alone. But also we need to move the agenda of the UN to support the work, essential work that local government does to serve citizens. They have been the first respondents during COVID. We have seen the cities and the local governments a visibility that they normally do not have, even if they are the ones who are bringing the water to your house, they're bringing the electricity to your house, they're removing your waste, they are making sure that there is a public lighting, and also, of course, that they are the first door for participation and listening to the citizens that they have to serve. We've been working very long time on these questions. I'm going to finish now with this picture. It's about local governments sitting as local governments in the UN Habitat Assembly about implementing the new urban agenda. So of course, when we think about the new urban agenda, who's going to implement the new urban agenda but the local governments, of course, in coordination with central, etc. There is still a lot to do. But there is also a lot that has been done on bringing the importance of local governments to the UN. And thanks to this collaboration that we have here with UNDESA, with UN Capital Development Fund, we've been working on this issue along. Still a lot to do, but this we're in a good way. And this specific and handbook help us very much to support local governments in doing their job. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Diana. So we've given us some vivid examples there of the cost effectiveness and co-benefits of this infrastructure asset management approach. Some really vivid pictures there and inspiration to fresh thinking, and also some really specific ways of engaging or roles the local government authorities are playing, from the policy space to implementation and design and effective use of tools. Thank you so much. So let's move now to our next panelist. This is Francis Biabagambi, experienced public service practitioner, 25 years in various local government and urban administration roles in Uganda, with a very broad understanding of asset management, financial and human resources, procurement, general urban management issues affecting local governments. He's currently town clerk and chief executive of Nansana Municipal Council. Mr. Biabagambi led the development and implementation of the asset management diagnostic tool and the AMAPs in Uganda, and provided very important substantive input to the handbook. I have two questions for you this morning, Francis. First, how can the global development community help national governments to forge and sustain that critical enabling environment, legislative, policy, regulatory environment for sound asset management? And then a second question for you: in municipalities that have piloted the UN asset management tools, how has the level of awareness around asset management and the commitment to concrete action changed? So over to you, please, Francis, for about 5 minutes. Thank you. And we may have Francis on the phone and or video, but over to you, please. The screen looks good.
Francis, please make sure you're unmuted. Let's give Francis maybe 20 more seconds or so, and then, you know, if we can't hear him, we'll move over to the next panelist and then try to sort out the technical issues in the meantime. So just one more time, Francis, please unmute yourself and let us know that you're there. So we still can't hear you. Okay, Caroline, I suggest we move on to the next panelist and then you come back to Francis after that. In the meantime, we're trying to sort out the technical issues.
Okay, so let's go to Linda. Let's go to Linda, please. I can see Linda. So she's here ready to go. Linda has over 35 years experience in physical asset management, and this includes managing infrastructure for the Canadian Department of National Defence, postdoctoral work at the National Research Council Institute for Research in Construction, and leading the Real Property Management Service Line at Defence Construction Canada. Linda is an adjunct professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Carleton University. And now she has her own consulting firm, Linda Newton Consulting, with a focus on strategic asset management. Linda is lead author of the 4 fundamentals chapters in the handbook and also the annex with the AMAP template. So 2 questions for you today, Linda. In light of the pandemic, which has very much exposed the risk of inadequately unmaintained infrastructure in healthcare, other critical infrastructure, what are some lessons, overarching lessons, that readers should take away from the handbook? And second, what are some examples of effective tools for infrastructure asset management in support of the SDGs at the local and national levels? Over to you, please, Linda.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's very exciting to be part of this panel and share my passion for asset management, which any of you that my colleagues have heard me know I get quite excited about. But I do promise to contain my excitement to my allotted time. So those are 2 really interesting questions. And to answer the first one, I think I'll start first with what those 3 lessons are, and then I'll talk a little bit, excuse me, more about each one. And I think for me, the 3 overarching lessons, pardon me, is first of all, understand what your critical assets are, their value and the service they provide. And we'll come back to that. The second lesson is don't wait for a crisis to start your asset management journey. And the third lesson, which Ajit will love to hear, is that information is key. So let's come back to the first one. It's understanding what your critical assets are, and their value and the service they provide. Many of our municipalities can identify what vital functions their assets might support. It could be health and safety, security, economy, social well-being. But where they don't do a good job is understanding the impact of service disruption. And so that is what will happen if I don't have that asset anymore. And where this becomes critical is there a significant impact? So if I don't have that asset, do I have major disruption and loss of service? I can no longer deliver the service that asset provides, versus a moderate impact where I might lose the service, but I can deliver it some other way. It might not be optimum, but I can deliver it, or there's no impact. Now, why do I bring this up? Is understanding why they're critical. We can look at critical many ways, as I've said, in terms of that vital function. And so when we did this exercise with our municipalities, we would have a lot that would identify perhaps their markets or their bus terminals as their critical assets. And rightly so, in that in many municipalities, these are a key source of own source revenue. But when you start to look at the impact of service disruption, and this is where in some ways COVID-19 really focused in on other assets, is that what would happen if you didn't have that? Well, if you don't have a market, can you move that function somewhere else? Absolutely. If you don't have a bus terminal, can the buses park somewhere else? Absolutely. What if you don't have a hospital? Can you deliver that service somewhere else? If you don't have that piece of equipment, can you deliver it somewhere else? Or sanitation. If something happens to your landfill site, can you deliver that somewhere else? So once we said to people, what's the impact of that? Really think about what those critical assets are and the service they provide. All of a sudden, the light went on and they started to think more in that sense. And understanding that risk allows you to be able to pivot So if you know that, you can pivot when we have something like an epidemic, the COVID-19 crisis or a public health crisis, because you've done that planning and you understand that criticality. And so you're thinking ahead. Now, the other item, don't wait for a crisis to start. Start simple. You can't do everything all at once. I mean, you can just be overwhelmed when you look at what asset management could entail. So think about one thing that you need to improve and improve now. Learn from lessons in the past. New may not always be the answer. And one of the things that's so exciting about this is to hear people say how much they enjoyed the focus on maintenance in the handbook, because new isn't always the answer. If you can't afford to maintain what you have now, how are you going to afford to maintain something new? So these simple actions can begin with questions like, why do we need the asset? And what function is it performing? Who's going to use it? Can we afford it? One of the best asset management action plans, and I'll talk about tools later in your second question, that we had was from a team in Tanga. And they wanted to, they were starting to look at their asset management journey, and they wanted to improve their waste management service. It was very, very important to them. It was their critical asset. And I was so impressed because their first idea was not, we need more garbage trucks, so we need to expand our landfill. It was, we need to understand what we're doing with our garbage. And so one of their first ones was to educate their public. Like, are they doing the right form of recycling or reuse before they made that leap to we need new stuff, as I call it. And so it's understanding the 6 whats that we talk about in the handbook. Hence my third point, information is key. We need to know what we have and what it's worth, what its condition is, and how long we expect it to last for. And then we can start talking about, what do we fix? Do we need something new? And so that information is what supports everything else. And that's why that was a very important chapter of the handbook. So again, 3 points, know what your critical assets are, start that journey and start it simply, and information. And then I think to answer the second question, some of the simpler tools for asset management are the tools we developed and we tried in the field, which sort of led to the writing of the handbook. And that's the diagnostic tool and the asset management action plan. They're very simple tools to help local governments and national governments understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and really walk you through the process of how you get from where you are now to where you might want to be. And so the secondary intent of those tools was to help educate, so that as you're walking through that process, you're seeing why you do what you need to do. That's and I'm looking. I was hoping Francis would be before me because he was going to confirm this for me. So I'm hoping that he will confirm this when he does his presentation. But they are simple tools. They're written in simple language. They have good examples that you can follow, and they're a really good stepping stone to starting that asset management journey. So back to you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's very clear and coherent. So 3 key lessons: understanding what is critical, and what you said there about how understanding itself of the risk can improve your ability to pivot in difficult times. I think this is a lesson we heard very much this morning in the DCF. And start now, information is key. I think lessons relevant for the development cooperation scene as a whole. And then you talked about the usefulness of the diagnostic tools and the AMAP. So thank you so much for that. We'll try to turn now to Francis, and hopefully the connection is working. Over to you, please, Francis.
Hello.
We can hear you.
My
well.
network is so bad that I'm not hearing you.
We can hear you though, Francis.
We can
Please
hear
go
you.
ahead.
Francis,
Okay. Hello.
please go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Francis.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, my network here has been so bad, and I've been finding it very difficult to connect. but I'm really very happy that I'm now on. My name once again, I'm Biabagambi Francis, and I'm currently counselor in Uganda. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, yes, I worked with UNDESA and with UNCDF on this assignment for assets management here in Uganda. And I was working with 20 local governments. We started with assessing the levels of assets management in the 20 local governments. And we helped the 20 local governments to build their capacity to formulate the assets management action plans. And later on, implement some of those action plans that they had formulated. As part of my assignments, I was also supposed to liaise with the different local government, with central government, on some of the asset management practices, making policies and making guidelines as well, and also the challenges that these local government and central government face in the management of assets. Can we move on, please? Next slide. Yeah, I think one of the issues that I'm supposed to look at was how can the global development communities help the national and local governments in the developing countries in assets management. One thing I think we all must note is that the assets management, as espoused by UNDESA, is relatively new in the local governments and even in our developing countries. And therefore, looking at this issue, I think one, that we need the developing countries, the development partners to offer expertise. Expertise, obviously, in terms of capacity building, expertise in terms of establishing systems, establishing policies in these countries, because currently that is greatly lacking. So we need the capacity in terms of putting in infrastructure, the capacity in terms of putting in systems, technology, the automation processes, which are clearly lacking. And we also need to create a pool of assets expertise so that we can cascade knowledge to other local governments and to other, even central government. Here in Uganda, I think we may have concentrated on local governments. So now some of those local governments, which we helped, have better systems than even central government ministries. So the problem is as big as that. And we also think we can have development partners to provide funding for the implementation of the AMAPs that we have formulated in the local governments here, which we assisted, and for some of them, we're very lucky that when we formulated the action plans, UNCDF came in to fund them, and obviously you would really see the enthusiasm was much bigger than when we were simply formulating the action plans and which were not funded. So that brings in a challenge because people are just on. It becomes an academic game. But when you provide funding, we believe, yes, that will spur more action. And I think we witnessed it here. We think that, yes, we can also organize the exposures, this so that people come to learn what others are doing. And I believe that makes copying a little bit more easier than not. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, the other issue was levels of awareness in assets management, and how can that level of awareness improve assets management here? I have tended to look at the national level as well as the local level, much as the question related only to the local governments. But I believe in this country, because of the awareness that has been created by the intervention from UNDESA and from UNCDF, we are having a little bit of a rush for central government, especially, to as much as possible prepare the policies, as much as possible prepare the guidelines. Good enough, we had a very good representation in our assignments, in our trainings for local governments, from the ministry and particularly the director in charge of assets management for the whole country was always there. And we are seeing that one because currently we have guidelines about assets management in the country, which we are implementing. We have had online trainings as well on the guidelines for all the local governments. And we're also seeing a lot of changes in the central government guidelines to do with the assets management, to deal with the land titling, to deal with the rehabilitation, all of them directing local governments and directing central government to ensure that we do a lot of investment in those areas. We have also seen the assessment protocols changed. And every year we conduct annual assessments for local governments in the different areas. But moving forward, we are seeing a lot of emphasis now on assets management, which was not there before, which is really a good indicator that the awareness is being translated into action. And we've seen the changes in the planning guidelines. We are now, for all the local governments, embarking on the 5-year development plan. And there is a whole lot of chapters that all allude to the necessity to have assets, to manage the assets management. So most of these guidelines are taking assets management very seriously and are making it very compulsory to ensure that the way we manage assets is reviewed, is very well assessed, and even very well reflected in the planning schemes. There has been an urge for the national task force on assets management in the country, because following the various trainings that we had here, there was a lot of reporting in the news, in the media, both print and even on TV. And following that one, as the country, they are insisting that I think we need a task force to look at the assets of the local governments and how they are being managed, and provide a way forward for government. Something. Yes, we have also seen inspection guidelines changed to include assets management, especially inspections for local government. I have one of the circulars and which I saw the permanent secretary directing the inspectors to ensure that when they come down, they look at how the local governments are managing assets in respect of rehabilitation, in respect of land titling, among others. And we got the next slide. Yes, at the local government and the community level, we are mandated now to integrate assets management into the planning processes of local governments, which I think is a really very good indicator, because it means yes, looking at assets management is now becoming more compulsory for all of us. We saw different local governments formulating assets management plan. This is still confined within the 20 local governments that we assisted, but we believe, yes, moving forward, other local governments will also emulate. I believe that's why we still need to cascade the assets management protocols different local governments. The appointment of assets management committees and the focal point persons, I think it was a welcome move. And I see so many other local governments also copying and doing the same, which I think is a very good indicator. There is now a very big emphasis on the disposal of assets. This one was given much more prominence when we had the training last time, and when we were moving around. Among the issues which were greatly captured was the obsolete vehicles, and buildings, and so this has been really given a lot of prominence because it is one of the issues where I think local governments were misusing and actually even losing a lot of money, because assets which are supposed to generate money were actually not being cared about. There is an attempt now to link assets management to revenue enhancement. So many people are looking for land titles, and so many people are using those land titles now to generate money, either through leasing the land or through using the land titles generated as correlatos. Previously, people would just get the land and sell it off and it goes, but now everybody has land. That land is actually an asset, and you can use that asset to generate money when you create land titles in that one. And obviously, not to mention that, yes, land titling is now compulsory. Government has moved in, even put on a moratorium that there is no investing any government money unless somebody has a title on that land, which is also a very welcome initiative, because it really shows how government is placing emphasis and importance on management of that land. And at the same time, I mean, there's also a guideline that if you don't have money to title the land, at least ensure that you do everything possible, including planting trees on that land or planting trees around the boundaries of that land, but that make sure that that valuable asset is actually protected. Yes, I think we can make, I think all in all, we see that there has been a lot of enthusiasm created. And yet I think obviously there is so much to do in terms of training, in terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of technological transfer for both central and local governments as far as the assets management is concerned. We're very happy to see the enthusiasm that people had during the online trainings. Thank you very much, Madam Linda. You helped us, and I think Uganda still treasures your input that you gave us, and we obviously need much more. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Daniel and the organizers.
Thank you so much, Francis. So that was a lot you just gave us there in terms of first, what can the Global Development Cooperation do, and very concrete ideas from expertise to capacity building to this idea of cascading knowledge, and of course also resources to help implement the AMAPs, and then a whole range of interesting indicators. You point us to that the awareness is starting to translate into action at the national level and also in the local and community level, including looking at such critical issues as land titling. So thank you so much for all that food for thought. So we're gonna move now to our next panelist. This is Jean-Francois Havot. He is Executive Director of the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV. That's an international network of local governments providing solutions to finance and investing in a sustainable and integrated urban environment. Has 15 years experience working with central and local governments from all over the world. He has a very extensive expertise in local finance and investing, and strong skills in working with public entities, donors, and investors. Before joining the FMDV, Jean-Francois has also worked for local governments, including the city of Antananarivo and the region of Ile-de-France. So 2 questions for you today. First, what is the link between infrastructure finance and infrastructure asset management? And how can we strengthen that link? So it's really 3 questions. Next, what is the unique role of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in financing and sustaining those local infrastructure investments? So over to you, Jean-Francois. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and thanks also to the UNDC team for the invitation, Daniel and all. So maybe before starting on this question, I want to highlight also the what I like to call the market failure that there is on urban infrastructure finance, because on one side, every mayors have projects on this desk to finance, and on the other side, we saw many credit line investment funds that have been developed by donors, by private investors, but still it doesn't connect. So the supply and the demand side are there, but the market is not there to connect projects and investment opportunities. There are many reasons to explain that, but one of them is the asset management in the way that infrastructure finance is often formulated from an initial capital investment perspective. So they see how much does it cost, but they don't see then how to operate it in the long term. And this represents sometimes more than the capital investment level of the infrastructure. So without having this into perspective, the project leaders cannot reach the bankability of their investment, and that explains also why the investors don't see it as bankable or investable. But asset management is also a question of evaluating the assets of its own territory. But like the first speaker was saying on data, you cannot evaluate your infrastructure assets without good data to evaluate what you have on your territory based on the infrastructure, based on the lands, and this really lower the capacity of public government to invest, because they put aside totally one big approach that help them to invest and to access to the capital market, for example. And 2 examples on that. On the land-based finance is largely underused by local governments, but cities sit on gold mines with their land asset property, but usually they don't even know it, and they don't know how to evaluate it when they are owner of the land. And you can really, once you have a good management of your land and a good management of the infrastructure you're going to set on your lands, you can really organize your financing strategy based on the land value that is going to be raised thanks to the infrastructure of the services. The second example is the management of the public lighting, for example. This is really specific. But if you really well organize the management of this asset on the city, you can save up to 70% of energy cost with the sound management of public lighting, with new technologies and LED approach and so on. And if you save 70% of energy, it costs less for the municipality. So it means you can invest more in these assets for the benefit of the population. So to answer your question, all of this can be strengthened by a better data collection to be able to project in the short, mid, and long term what are your needs of your territory and what is the need of my infrastructure and my services on my land. So how much do I need to invest and how can I invest on that? But also to map the global assets as a whole of the territory, just not seeing sectorial asset of your territory, but trying to have a global view in order to better integrate your capacities then to invest into infrastructures. and then maybe also to better discuss with the finance team and the investment plan of the city, but also with the national governments and other, in order to see how to work on that. And I think the speaker before me really well explained how to do that. Now to answer to your last question on what role a non-governmental NGO can play as a network of cities. We are considered as a NGO, and I like to say also that we are playing a kind of pilot fish role, because we are trying to explore, test, and bring innovative models to bring new solutions to public authorities, but also to connect these public authorities with potential partners from the donors, from the investment side, and really to try to bring everybody in one direction to see if then it opens a good way to open development. And for that, we organize as FMDV living labs, which bring different stakeholders to test pilot at small scale innovative infrastructure in a territory. But we organize also coaching or matchmaking sessions to make different stakeholders discuss and cooperate together in order to find the appropriate solutions and to connect infrastructure projects with the needs of the territory. So I will stop there, and I hope I answer your question. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Jean-Francois. So you started with the market failure, and then you gave us an example at the end on how NGOs are actually helping to address that, playing an incubator function and a brokering function. And then you also talked to us about the importance of the needs assessment and taking a holistic point of view. So thank you so much, very helpful. And now we move to our last panelist. This is Dustin Kerry. He's a capacity building officer with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. After receiving his Master of Climate Change degree, he applied his understanding of climate science to the fields of climate adaptation and natural disaster resilience at municipal scale. Specializing in flood mitigation and municipal asset management, Dustin has led national training programs that work to enable local governments to respond better to climate risk. He's managed the development of a guide on integrating climate change considerations into municipal asset management. He's a recognized national expert for those seeking information on climate change adaptation and practical resilience strategies. And he's Secretariat co-lead of the Municipal Climate Services Collaborative. Dustin is the lead author of Chapter 6 in the handbook on climate resilient asset management, a process for local governments. So, Dustin, 2 questions for you. With extreme weather events, heat islands, other climate hazards exposing the dangers of failing infrastructure, like failing power grids, heating systems, other critical infrastructure, what concrete steps can local governments take to strengthen asset resilience and reduce the risk of climate hazards? Second, how can governments and their developing partners work together, not only to enhance climate resilience of infrastructure, but also to reduce carbon emissions in line with Paris Agreement commitments? Over to you, please, Dustin.
Thank you very much, Caroline. To start the answer, I have to just refer back to Ajit's presentation. He spoke really eloquently about the importance of data, and that's going to be a real, really clear and important role here. Both in terms of climate data, the environmental loads that your infrastructure is going to be exposed to both now and into the future as a result of climate change, and infrastructure data, the condition of the infrastructure as well as the capacity that it was designed to accommodate. Both of these play an important role in undertaking a high-level risk assessment exercise, as was described in the guide, which allow you to focus in particularly on those pieces of critical infrastructure like Linda described, identifying what your municipality really cannot operate without and continue to deliver the services that you rely on, as well as the interconnected and interdependent infrastructure systems that those critical pieces of infrastructure rely on. In order to build out the resilience of these pieces of infrastructure, when you know where critical climate vulnerabilities exist, things like building to climate resilient design standards and codes are really important pieces of work to consider. While this might increase the upfront cost of infrastructure, building for rare but foreseeable events will ultimately cost considerably less in the long term as it extends as it increases the probability of receiving the full expected lifespan of a piece of infrastructure as the operating conditions that it's expected to perform within change. To provide one local example, in 1998 in Canada, a really severe ice storm occurred throughout much of the eastern part of the country, which caused absolutely catastrophic damage to the electrical transmission and distribution system. High voltage transmission lines completely buckled under the weight of ice accretion. And while that is an example very local to Canada, the implications can be applied more broadly. New standards and designs were brought in, and as either new infrastructure was built or aging pieces were replaced, they were brought up to that more resilient standard. And if your local government may not have developed codes or standards for pieces of critical infrastructure, organizations like the ISO or the National Standards Association of other countries may be worth consulting for design criteria. Another example would be to maintain and operate infrastructure as they were designed to be operated and maintained to. Aside from things like inadequate construction, failing to maintain infrastructure in a sufficiently operable condition is probably the surest way to see it prematurely fail when exposed to hazards, ultimately working to devalue your investment. For the second question about meeting both greenhouse gas reduction targets as well as climate resilience targets, Diana really spoke to a bit of the heart of it is local governments have to start to think green rather than just purely gray. Kind of two mindsets that may be that are worth disavowing. Asset managers should work to disavow themselves of, rather, are that a stream of new assets should be prioritized over maintaining existing assets, and assets should be maintained for the sake of that asset. Instead, asset managers, municipal leadership, and development partners can take a more multifaceted approach of community good, making sure that assets are designed and operated with a more people-centric approach, which frequently involves more green and sustainable components. To give an example, while a road may be maintained in a rather excellent condition, and that may represent good commuter and access levels of service, it comes with the trade-offs of stormwater runoff, particulate pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and really non-vibrant spaces. Understanding those trade-offs are something that are more likely to be realized if you bring in a more multidisciplinary approach to asset management. If the transportation department speaks with stormwater management department, health unit, environmental experts, and local economic development departments. By bringing in that multidisciplinary perspective and transforming that asset space, different commuter levels of service can be met with active transportation and rapid transit, for instance. Green infrastructure installations can work to reduce stormwater runoff while beautifying the space. The asset lifespan may be extended with the reduction of vehicles as well as maintaining that stormwater component. And ultimately, the more sustainable space helps the local government meet those national objectives. One really great international example in this space was the redevelopment of parts of Rio in advance of the World Cup, one main arterial street was transformed from a multi-vehicle perspective to a bus rapid transit laneway with green infrastructure installations and large multi-use pathways, and it became a far more vibrant and sustainable space. And ultimately, that people-centric design helped to work to achieve both the sustainability and resilience objectives. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dustin. So some very concrete examples there on how to build resilience by using such things as design standards and codes, whether available locally or from elsewhere. And then you also talked about how a common goods perspective and a multidisciplinary approach can integrate these objectives of strengthening resilience as well as meeting the Paris commitment. So thank you so much for that and those very specific and inspiring examples. I want to thank our panelists, and I will swiftly hand over to Daniel now to let us know how we can best use the remaining time that we have. Back to you, please, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for a wonderful job and introducing the panelists, asking those really pertinent questions, and then giving very concise summaries of what has been said. I think this was very, very exciting. There has been a very lively discussion in the chat. It's really, really exciting. From capturing data to even things like blockchain technology, and there have been quite a few comments and quite a few questions. We collected them, and I would suggest that we quickly give the floor to panelists to give short ideas or answers to them, and then move on to Samantha, who has been waiting patiently to help us conclude the panel and also chart out some of the next steps. So please bear with us. I will read out the questions now and give it back to our panelists, and then give the floor to Samantha to make the concluding remarks. We're a little bit behind, so if people can perhaps stay online for another 10 minutes or so, that would be great, and we're more or less done around 1. Now, in terms of the questions that have been asked, and I just see a new one here, let me go through the ones that were really directly targeted. For Ajit, there was a question that said, we understand asset data and accurate data is vital for managing infrastructure, but are there any low-cost technologies and processes that can help countries like local governments in countries like Bangladesh? And Ajit already went into some ideas like drones and using cell phones. Perhaps building on that, Ajit, you could maybe elaborate a little bit on what can be done sort of right now with what people have. Are there any other ideas? So I would give it over to you very quickly, and then go back to ask the next question to, I guess, Linda would be the next one. Ajit, over to you.
Yeah, sure. My answer is going to disappoint everyone. I guess the lowest cost and the most effective technology is probably pen and paper. And nothing can actually replace good processes, actual processes that you need to have in place. And I think that's really fundamental, instead of just jumping over to technologies. But to just answer the question itself, I mentioned a couple of examples of just low-cost mobile phones, very low-cost tablets, and so on. They're not really expensive, very portable. If you're going out onto a site to do some surveys and to gather data, and so on. Very, very simple things that can make your job easier in terms of measuring things. A simple laser measurement device does not cost a lot at all. So there are some simple technologies, actual hardware technologies out there that are low cost. In terms of the actual systems themselves, again, if for data management systems can get very expensive if you go for enterprise asset management solutions and so on. But then you can start simple. You can start with Microsoft Microsoft Office, even Microsoft Office, if you think that you need to pay a license fee, there are open source applications out there that you can use, databases that are open source out there that you can use without spending any money. All you need there, and again, this is not as simple as it sounds, you need some expertise in being able to use spreadsheets, being able to use these databases. There are zero cost databases available in the market. So there are lots of technologies that are low cost, and we can find a list of them always, but I think the key thing is to get good processes in place, and that actually is zero cost. Yeah, I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you so much, Ajit. When we were in the field pre-COVID, we also thought about sort of software solution, things like that, and sometimes it can be very, very simple. Of course, you need to understand the processes, and you need to understand what asset management and data collection within asset management information systems is all about. But if you want to know where your assets are, right, you can just use a simple map and use some pins, and you can use different colors, right, that designate different conditions of those assets. If the asset is in a state of array, if it needs to be repaired, you can have a red pin there. If it's functioning beautifully, there's no need for any action at this point, you can have a green one. So they're really low cost options that don't even need to be technological in a sense. And as we think about this, we come up more and more with these ideas. Okay, I want to move over to Linda. I'm not sure I fully understand the question. The question is basically how how project management is related to asset management. I'm not really sure I understand that question, but I guess there were some other questions also for you, Linda, about the bigger issue of asset management strategies. And perhaps it'll help to just very, very quickly give a quick idea of what it means to have a policy, a strategy, and an asset management action plan. What's the difference without going into too much detail?
Yeah.
Over to you, Linda.
Thanks, Daniel. I've refined my 30-second elevator pitch on this because I've dealt with it a lot in the past couple of months. But the simplest solution is the policies. Policies are the highest level of documents. They tell you why you're doing something and what you're doing. So if you think of it as a journey, the policy tells you where you're going. The other documents that support that the strategy will tell you, where we're going and what are the various ways we're going to get there. And then when we come down to the directives and the guidelines, those are those documents when we talk about asset management that tell us how we're going to do things. So think of it as that evolution from the why and the what down to the how. Over to you, Daniel.
Great, thank you so much. That was concise and very clear. And please look at the handbook. I have it there behind me, and it explains it in more detail. Everyone also take note of the email address, and unless you have it already, IAMH, Infrastructure Asset Management Handbook @un.org, and you can continue the conversation and ask us questions. We are really working on a big, nice network that encourages peer learning. Lastly, two more questions before we give it over to Samantha. There was a question about land tenure, and it's a highly politically charged question, right? That in a lot of countries in Africa, in a lot of least developed countries, the land system is really a challenge. And although the government may say the land belongs to the people, it really belongs to the government. And then land titling is not clear. So how can we make sure we can capture land as an asset and use it as a collateral for other assets? Francis, I would give over that question to you. Please try to be as brief as you can. I know you have so much experience with this, but if you can try to give a 30-second answer, that'll be great. And then we'll hand it over to Jean-Francois for the last question, and then Samantha. Francis.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. And indeed, even here in Uganda, the land channel system is a complex one because we have so many systems. One where individuals own land, another is where some land is owned to other people, and you find that even as a government, we are sitting on a land that doesn't belong to us as a government, and we have to buy it or lease it or lease it from those individuals. But I believe by and large, the whole thing is that we try as much as possible ensure that we have land titles for the land where government installations are. And then we can conveniently use the land titles that we have, the land that we have, possibly as a source of revenue, but also to protect the investments that we have over those pieces of land. Because untitled land is liable for encroachment by so many people, and we have actually seen government losing their buildings and their installation because the land is claimed by so many other people who will even say they inherited it from their great grandfathers. Back to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Francis. And one of the really low cost and sustainable solutions we've seen in Uganda, right, is to demarc land with trees. So, you know, we've seen tree planting around public land, which then creates a natural barrier and helps prevent encroachment. So these simple steps, they have, you know, multiple effects. They help with the environment, they help politically, and so forth. So really interesting ideas like that that have been pioneered in Uganda and other countries. Finally, Francois, a lot of questions in the chat about the link between revenue enhancement and asset management. And I feel like this is the new frontier as we, you know, build on the handbook. How can we make sure that we are not just financing infrastructure, but we're actually financing infrastructure over its entire life cycle? So we're not just financing infrastructure construction, but infrastructure maintenance. And how can we make sure that there is a better link between municipal finance and infrastructure finance? It's a big question. I don't expect an answer, but over to you for 30 seconds, and then we'll give it to Samantha for concluding remarks. Jean-Francois, please.
Thank you, Daniel. Very, very tough question. I could talk about that for hours, but mainly, and not trying not to be too technical, but in infrastructure finance, you have the CapEx, the capital expenditures, and then you have the OpEx, which are the operational expenditures. And these are what the investors are looking at. And usually, like I was saying, cities are only looking at the CapEx on what it costs. But if you have a really strategic dialogue with investors, DFIs or private investors, they will push us to integrate also the OpEx into the financial transaction that we are organizing for the infrastructure. So my just point on that will be, let's try to discuss with financial engineering, with financial experts to see how to really better frame the financial transaction that we are organizing for these infrastructures. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. And this is the next step in our project sort of knowledge generation phase. We will look exactly at that and you know, invite some of the leading experts on public financial management and have them talk to infrastructure asset management as experts and see how we can really bolster that link. The more revenue is generated through infrastructure asset management, the better. And the more revenues we'll have for really long-term financing that looks at the entire life cycle of the assets, of all phases of the life cycle, including the disposal phase at the very end. I'm going to give it over to Samantha now. She is representing our key partner in this effort, in addition to UNCDF and many other stakeholders around the world, and such as FMDV and regional development banks, regional economic commissions, and so forth. But the troika, the three partners in this are really UNDESA, UNCDF, and UNOPS, who sort of have come together very closely to implement this project. And I'm really excited to be working with UNOPS even more closely in the future. Samantha is the head of strategic initiatives, infrastructure, and project management at UNOPS. Samantha, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, everyone can hear me. Thanks also to Naveed and Caroline and to all our panelists for really rich presentations and some interactive discussion as well. It's a real pleasure to be here today to provide the closing remarks for this timely event to help make the case for development cooperation on infrastructure asset management. Coming from UNOPS, we're really focused on infrastructure. Infrastructure is at the heart of sustainable, inclusive, and resilient development. Our research, together with the University of Oxford, shows that infrastructure systems influence around 92% of all targets across the Sustainable Development Goals. So infrastructure systems therefore significantly contribute to achieving development objectives locally, nationally, and internationally. And infrastructure touches every aspect of our lives, from the roads we travel on, mobile networks that connect us, provision of water, power for our phones, our computers, shelters us from the elements, etc. One of the things that I really valued in a lot of the presentations and the discussion today was the focus on that it's all about the services that infrastructure provides. Essentially, they provide, they protect, they connect us and allow societies to thrive. However, as we heard today from our panel, there are a lot of challenges in planning, delivering, and managing infrastructure systems, and I can't possibly do justice to these discussions in just a few minutes, but if I can just share a few of the thoughts that, a few of the things that really resonated for me. So first and foremost, it's hard to discuss asset management without looking at data collection and management. Ajit pointed out that managing our infrastructure requires good access to relevant data, the ability to turn data into relevant information. The technology for collecting data needs to be simple and work at a fundamental level. It needs to help people on the ground to do their jobs. Mobile phones, GPS camera capabilities, drones, they're some of the low-cost opportunities. Also, some discussions of even lower cost opportunities. That being said, I think it's really important that Ajit reminds us that people are actually the most important component, and capacity building is essential. Moving on with excellent examples from UNDP, Diana reminded us that infrastructure today is not what it was 100 years ago, and that most of the existing global infrastructure doesn't meet 21st century standards. We need to think about infrastructure in a smarter and greener way, and cities provide an excellent context for that. As Linda highlighted, the COVID-19 pandemic has only elevated the importance of asset management as crises do, where local and national governments have understood their critical infrastructure assets and the impact of service disruption, which also helps them to understand the service that the asset actually provides. They were able to understand gaps in capacity and modify existing buildings, add new ones to increase service capacity, and cut through red tape to respond effectively, undoubtedly saving lives. Francis was kind enough to share with us experience from Uganda's efforts on asset management, following some of the groundwork made by UNDESA and UNCDF. Working with 20 local governments and central government ministries, asset management is being incorporated at multiple levels and entry points, including organizing exposure visits as part of like a capacity building. There was plenty of exciting evidence that asset management is being embraced and institutionalized there. Another example from UNOPS, it's in the handbook, is work with the Bangladesh Local Government Engineering Department to co-create an approach that better and more sustainably manage assets, one which is aligned with very high international standards. Jean-Francois demonstrated how crucial infrastructure asset management is for government finance. A lot of this is dependent on the mapping of global assets and data collection. Better managed assets reduce costs linked to asset failures, help generate more revenue, property values increase, taxpayers are likely to be more willing contributors. And also, he highlighted the role of the NGO as not just matchmaking, but also aligning different agendas. It sounded a bit like herding cats. Another key challenge to delivering infrastructure services is climate change. And I really appreciate some of Dustin's examples around various projects, including the one on road maintenance, and really stressing multifaceted, multidisciplined perspective and a people-centered approach. And really, in all of this, understanding the sort of system interdependencies to achieve both low carbon emissions and greater climate resilience. Climate risk and vulnerability assessments are also key to strategic planning, existing and future infrastructure. And he also stressed that ultimately the upfront costs of designing for resilience are more than recovered by the increased performance over the life cycle of the assets. And that's really one of the key, key important reasons why asset management reinforces positive resilience. So to address all of these challenges that we've been discussing, to seize the opportunities in infrastructure asset management, I think this session has explored many important approaches focused on outcomes, services, led by data and evidence. To manage infrastructure services, we need to stop thinking of infrastructure only as individual physical assets, and instead as a system of interconnected assets which work together to deliver a service for the achievement of a desired outcome. The UN Handbook on Infrastructure Asset Management offers practical guidance and adaptable tools that support governments to manage infrastructure assets effectively. And I think that as you go forward, if anybody takes up the handbook and uses it, it would be very interesting to get feedback on it. As infrastructure assets work together as a system to deliver a service, we must as well. And UNOPS, with our central mandate in infrastructure, is excited to continue to work together with our partners, UNDESA, UNCDF, to support governments to deliver on their development goals by helping them to manage their infrastructure assets and systems more effectively. So thank you again, and back to Daniel.
Thank you so much, Sam, for this very nice, concise summary. We're coming to a close of the session. Before I close, I just wanted to also mention a few more people that have been so key to this effort. My colleague Jeffrey Machano from UNCDF is here. He's been really a key partner. Jeffrey Morgan who from UNOPS, and last but not least, a person you may all know by now, Claire Chan, who's really done so much to get this project to new heights, and she's done all the work together with my colleague Sylvia in the background to make this a smooth experience. Unless anyone wants to say something, I would close it here. Please stay engaged. There is the email address behind me that I mentioned before. Feel free to write us anytime and let us work on creating a critical for asset management. Thank you so much to everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye.